Over time, we have seen the UFC pick up numerous champions from other promotions that have continued their greatness within the organisation. Sadly, this isn't always the case as we look at our top 5 MMA champions that failed to live up to expectations once they got into the UFC. David Branch was the World Series of Fighting middleweight champion and the light heavyweight champion, of which both belts he had defended. Now that's a real double champ there. He was riding an impressive 10-fight win streak before his contract ended and became a free agent. Thereafter, he vacated both his belts to sign with the UFC in February 2017. His debut at UFC 211 was a narrow split decision win, before getting dominated by Luke Rockhold in his second fight, where he got finished in the second round. However, he did make a strong comeback in his next fight by finishing Thiago Santos in the first round, which was no easy task. However, that will be the last time we would see David Branch get his hand raised in the octagon, when he went on to get finished in his next 2 fights by Jared Cannonier and Jack Hermanson. Shortly after his third straight loss, USADA announced that Branch had failed a drug test for growth hormones. Shortly after this announcement, as in the very next day, the UFC cut ways with David Branch. Tom Dukenwa, another double champion on this list who was the BAMMA featherweight and bantamweight champion, who had also successfully defended both of his belts. He came into the UFC riding a 10-fight unbeaten streak, 8 of which being finishes, with the Dukenwa hype continuing as he went on to violently knock out Patrick Williams in his UFC debut in April 2017. Unfortunately, he would only go on to have 2 more fights before his very surprising early retirement at just aged 24. Out of everyone on this list, he's the only one who wasn't affected by his age or drug testing. Having retired at such a young age, it wouldn't be a surprise to see him return back to the sport at some time in the future, especially since he clearly hadn't even hit his prime yet. Will Brooks was the Bellator lightweight champion who seemed unstoppable at the time. Having beaten another great lightweight champion in Michael Chandler twice, it seemed as though Will Brooks would be holding onto that belt for a long time. However, once he became a free agent, he had other plans for his career, whilst riding an impressive 9-fight win streak. During contract negotiations, Bellator actually offered him more money. However, Will Brooks took a gamble on himself and accepted a lower paid contract just to be on the biggest MMA stage in the world. That gamble didn't pay off as he just couldn't seem to get his footing within the organisation. Perhaps it may have been the bright lights that got to him, or just simply the tougher competition. Despite having a good start in his debut against Ross Pearson at the Ultimate Fighter finale in July 2016, everything went downhill from then on, as he went on to suffer 3 finish losses in his next 3 fights, before parting ways with the UFC. I'm sure leaving Bellator and rejecting their generous contract offer must be one of his biggest regrets. Ben Askren. He had a perfect 18-0 record before making history in the first ever trade between major organisations when Demetrius Johnson went to ONE FC. There was talk of him joining the UFC even long before he joined ONE Championship, although it seems like a lifetime ago now when he was the welterweight champion at Bellator, even beating the great Douglas Lima. After which he continued on his dominance with his overwhelming wrestling style and staying at the top of the mountain at ONE Championship before retiring back in 2013. News of Ben Askren joining the UFC broke waves across the MMA community, and so did his first fight and very controversial win against Robbie Lawler. Unfortunately, that will be the last time we would ever see Ben Askren as an undefeated fighter, as we all know what happened after that. At least his name will forever be in the record books for the fastest ever knockout in UFC history. Shortly after getting choked out by Damian Maia, Ben Askren announced his second retirement from MMA. However, he did state this wasn't due to the 2 losses he had suffered. Instead, it was down to him needing a hip replacement, in which he feared he wouldn't be the same athlete after his surgery. For a number of years while he was still in his prime, there was always talk about how he would go up against the top echelon fighters in the UFC. It's a shame we never got to see this earlier, as it may have been a different result had he been in his prime. Hector Lombard. Hector Lombard was on a destructive 20-fight win streak, 16 of which being finishes. This man was the Terminator at the time as Bellator middleweight champion, and people could not wait for him to get inside the octagon, for him to face other high-caliber opponents. Many expected him to become the UFC middleweight champion, including the UFC, who took a big gamble in him when they bought him out of his contract for $400K just to sign him. Lombard went on to suffer 2 split decision losses, both of which he rebounded from, with first-round knockouts following, so the hype around him still continued at the time. He then went on to win his next 3 fights, before what would be his last ever win in the UFC being overturned for testing positive for anabolic steroids. Speaking of steroids, check out another list of the top 5 fighters whose physique and performance drastically regressed after performance-enhancing drug testing became more prominent in the UFC. There's a link for it down below in the description box, and there'll also be another link for you to click at the end of this video. After returning from his suspension in 2016, in what seemed to be a clean version of Hector Lombard, he went on a devastating 6-fight losing skid before being cut by the UFC. Thanks for watching the video, and feel free to comment down below for any other top 5 lists you would like to see.